got me interested in a lot of professional development, and I was lucky enough to get a job at Lucasfilm, which I've now been at for 25 years now. And one of the things that I obsess over is creatures and odd stories and mysteries behind certain things. And I found a like-minded soul with Tom Spina. And Tom, you can introduce yourself there.
Thank you for that. Yeah, like-minded indeed. I'm Tom Spina. I have both Tom Spina Designs and Regal Robot. I've been doing monsters and effects forever, basically because of Star Wars. I saw it. It had a profound effect on my brain. And rather than just studying it, I wanted to make it. And luckily, over the years, we've gotten to work with Lucasfilm and Disney and theme parks and all kinds of stuff, doing creatures that have turned up on some of the new Disney Plus shows, Mando and all of that. And but with Regal Robot, we do more customer-facing stuff. We actually make replicas of the original props and things like that. And we've been going to the Lucasfilm archives at Skywalker Ranch, technically the Ranch archives now.
Yeah, that's right.
And 3D scanning a lot of the original props, studying this stuff, and discovering things along the way, finding things that people thought were lost, and having a lot of fun while we do it. So this is a panel that's kind of a revised version of one we did at a FanX event probably 6 or 7 years ago now.
Years ago, yeah.
So a lot of other new stuff has come to light, and we're going to dive way deep into the shadows of Jabba's palace and the creatures of Return of the Jedi.
So an early version of this presentation was something I put together for the 30th anniversary of Return of the Jedi. And it was prompted by discovering of odd documents in the Lucasfilm archives, like what we have here. When it came to Return of the Jedi, it was the first time that ILM specifically was tasked to do the creatures for a movie. In the first two Star Wars movies, Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, the creature effects were done by Stuart Freeborn in the UK. And George, particularly with Return of the Jedi, there were a lot of examples of things where he brought things closer to home. And I think part of it is because ILM had grown and it became something that he had more faith in, and he wanted to be basically able to go down the road and check on things rather than fly over to England to check on things. So for Return of the Jedi, the ILM shop created a creature department. They were also in charge of creating and fabricating the costumes for that movie, which they hadn't done for the first two. So anyway, among the archives that we found is this sort of Bible, this creature list that tallied everything that was scheduled to be built for Return of the Jedi. And they all had these incredibly, these great code names, or they're really not code names. They're the only names these creatures were known as at the time. So that was the starting point, and we went from there.
And of note on this was one that really confounded even us for a long time, was Weeba Weeba.
Weeba Weeba.
Yeah, we won't give it away.
No, I knew it. It was like this legendary thing. It became like my white whale. I need to find out who Weeba Weeba is.
What's a Weeba Weeba?
Yeah, became obsessed with it.
So let's see if I can get this thing going.
Got to bounce it off like a pool.
There we go.
There we go.
So the man put in charge of the creature crew, the monster shop as they called it at the time, was Phil Tippett, legendary stop motion animator. He also worked on some creatures for A New Hope when they did reshoots with Rick Baker's crew, which, by the way, we have a panel on that on Sunday if you want to check it out. And Phil is a absolute mad genius when it comes to creature stuff. He's really, really good at breaking the human form and coming up with stuff that is not what you would consider on the nose for an alien. And I've been really lucky to get to know him over the years, and we just recently did a replica of his very early too snail-like, as it's called in the making of documentaries, Jabba the Hutt. Just this absolutely disgusting, melted butter-looking slob of a thing with tons of feet. And we absolutely loved making these. We actually made all of those in our New York shop. And it was amazing seeing like 150 of these things laid out after they're all being painted, just disgusting and covering tables. Of note, on the bottom, there's his 2 human Jabba, and to the left of that is one I always thought looked like Ralph McQuarrie's designs. That's actually Chris Wallace, who made all the Gremlins for the movie Gremlins. He made that one prior to Ralph coming on the show.
Oh, interesting.
So,
And we use that design for a character named as Morrigan in Star Wars Rebels. So we're constantly looking through the work that's been done in the past. Thank you for Rebels. And inspiration from things that didn't make it onto screen.
hey, Frank, would you mind giving us the next slide? Thank you. Jabba obviously went through a lot of incarnations. One of the ones that was really kind of forgotten and shown briefly in the Classic Creatures documentary is this one with a crank where they were testing his tail out. And it's very much based on Phil's early sketch, which did three-dimensional sketch of Jabba. And I love the G.I. Joes in there. Yeah. I forget, does anybody know the name of the UK version of the G.I. Joes at the time?
Oh, Action Man.
There you go.
Yeah.
So they were technically Action Man figures, not G.I. Joe. Okay, I'm just going to yell Frank every time we need to go to the next slide because the clicker's not working. Thank you. So that's Stuart Freeborn with a very early version of the full-size sculpt. Clearly taking a very direct inspiration from Phil's mock-up, even including the jug down there.
One thing I wanted to add, as I said, ILM was the first. This was the first time they were tasked to do all the creatures. They didn't do all of them. So Stuart Freeborn's big contribution to Return of the Jedi was Jabba, which is obviously an enormous contribution, and he also supervised the Ewoks. But that's outside of the scope of this particular panel.
That's right. Ewoks will be at a future Indiana Comic-Con.
We could probably do a whole hour.
We could definitely do an hour on Ewoks. So John Coppinger was brought in to refine the Jabba sculpt, and I actually was just chatting with him recently about how he came in and there was that original sculpture, and he carved away at it and eventually had them make a totally new armature because he couldn't dig far enough in to make the changes he wanted. Let's see. Hey, there we go. Most people probably at this point know Jabba has a tattoo, right? Is this news to anyone here? All right, this is a hypocrite. All right, no, a few people. All right, that's pretty good. The bigger mystery, though, is this. So, do you have the dimensions offhand? Do you remember?
I do, yeah. So it's about 2.5 feet by 9 feet long, which is much smaller than what the Jabba is.
And 9 feet is with his tail fully extended, curled
yeah.
up. He's maybe 3 feet tall. This has been in the archives at Skywalker Ranch for years, and no one seemed to know what it was for. That had been lost footage forever, and now we finally know that we've been seeing this Jabba at the archives for years, and always like, what is that? Now we know. The cooler thing though was so Tony McVeigh is a sculptor who worked on Return of the Jedi. He's most famous for making Salacious Crumb. Mm-hmm. He also worked on sculpts for Cy Snoodles, the Ishii-Tib alien, and a bunch of other stuff. And absolutely brilliant sculptor. He's still sculpting to this day. He's got a little studio. He just does it for fun, but he's unbelievably brilliant when it comes to sculpting. The ILM was having trouble capturing Jabba's likeness, and they brought Tony in at the last minute to do the head and the upper body on this. So just working from like those 4 images there, Tony captured Jabba really, really well. And he had this photo in his scrapbook, and it's just more history and he had no idea what it was used for, by the way. So one of the things I think we like to do the most, and we have a panel tomorrow about the Star Wars Cantina. We have another one on Sunday about it. If you're enjoying this so far, thanks. But also come to the Cantina ones. We love to look in the shadows and see what do we see. And hidden around Han and Carbonite that's a tauntaun on the wall right there. So clearly somebody was hunting, I'm going to say, relatively slow-moving friendly beasts on Hoth.
Well, when you think about it, it's Jabba's trophy area. He's got Han, and then he's got mounted heads, and one of the heads is a tauntaun.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the other side, speaking of slow-moving beasts, is so really tough to make out there. But this is a piece that's also still in the archives. It's on the bottom left of the screen. It's what's called a jerba. And this is a pack animal that is seen standing outside the cantina. And that's actually George and Marcia Lucas up on the top left at a party where they rented, if I'm remembering right, stormtroopers and the Jerba and some other original props from the movie for this. I don't know whether it was a
charity thing?
fundraiser,
Yeah, I think it was a
thing?
charity thing. Yeah. Yeah, that's
And
it.
down on the bottom is a picture from Art Models. Our friends at Prop Store gave us that. That was the company, Fred Pearl's company, that made the dewback and the Gerbas for the movie. We actually recently found some footage of, or some paperwork that showed that Fred actually did some molding and life casts for Stuart Freeborn for the Cantina.
Oh, wow.
That's me. That's me and Rob that work in New York. We do these life-size busts of the Tauntauns in case anybody wants to be like Jabba and have one on the wall. I couldn't resist because it's just, how often do you get to be in a herd of Tauntauns?
So for Return of the Jedi is famously created a lot of new creatures and filling out the Jabba's palace, but it also did recycle a handful of remaining Cantina masks. George Lucas was famously dissatisfied with what the original shoot of the Cantina was, but not so dissatisfied that he wouldn't allow some of these barflies back on screen as new creatures and different characters. What's interesting, and this may seem sacrilegious nowadays, but you'll see photos of the original Cantina aliens, and those are gone because they often get repainted and remodified to be different creatures. So the original Snaggletooth is not, you can't find Snaggletooth anymore.
If my arms were any shorter, we'd never get through this.
Longer than mine.
Yeah, here's your Snaggletooth that was modified. So he was actually modified that way for the holiday special.
Yep.
And then turns up as, I believe, Jism is his name.
Something like that, yeah.
In Return of the Jedi with the sort of Jawa-looking pouch there. So this is a favorite topic of ours. It is the unrealized creatures. So with my company, Regal Robot, we've been going through and scanning all of the concept maquettes, those first drafts that these guys did when they were trying to figure out what does Jabba look like, what does Bib Fortuna look like. And the really cool thing is, maybe there's 40 or 50 creatures that are realized for the movie, but there's 90 of these maquettes. Mm-hmm. And what that means is there's cool monsters from Star Wars that haven't been made yet. And these are some of them. And you've got stuff here by Dave Carson on the top left, Phil Tippett top right, Chris Wayless all the way across the bottom. We've got, come on. Some stuff by Tippett top left. No one knows who did that blue guy with the necklace, and he's actually missing. Ken Ralston did the Thinker on the bottom left, and I think Dave Carson did the Bib Fortuna on the right with the robe, which is just a really, really
different take on the character, yeah.
And I love the sense of character that comes through in that sculpt. That's somebody who's up to something.
What's interesting is some of the images of those maquettes surfaced in museum tours, and photography of it was known to the public. And Decipher, which was the publisher of the card game in the 90s, took those images and photoshopped them into real Star Wars backgrounds. So all of a sudden we had these aliens that we'd never seen before that were either in the cantina, placed in the cantina, or in Jabba's palace in these card set. Now, those of us who are really deep in the weeds recognize them as unproduced maquettes, but the average person was like, where is this person? I've never seen this character in Star Wars before.
Kenner never made the hole in the head guy.
So there was all this online chatter. Are there deleted scenes we've never heard of? It's like, no, it's just Decipher with Photoshop doing their magic.
The guy that made these three is a fellow named Kirk Thatcher. Anybody out there see Star Trek IV, the one with the whales? So the punk on the bus singing the I Hate You song, that's Kirk Thatcher. And he also sang that song. He had a band. They put together a band so that he could, make the punk song for that. And he did these three, including the one this predates Ghostbusters, but that's a real Slimer right there in the middle.
Yeah.
And he is actually lifting his skin off of his skull to eat an apple.
Yeah. That one we know it as apple slug.
Correct.
And it's such a great
There's
image.
a cool thing that just turned up in the archives, actually. So the guy on the left in the garbage can, there is a little cobra snake-looking guy that sits next to him with a straw, and he's drinking the bathwater out. And that snake was missing for years, but it recently turned up.
Wonderful. Reunited after all this time.
That's right.
This one's cool.
Yeah, so this was a Phil Tippett concept called Cobra Lady or Cobra Woman, depending. And this actually went to Stuart Freeborn as makeup rather than a mask. And Freeborn's team actually produced a cowl for it, but they never completed the character. And Freeborn's team also did a first draft on Akbar, seen on the right. And you could probably tell why they went back to Phil Tippett to make the final. And that's Phil's small maquette on the left. Oh, more track. Okay, let's see. Which way is which? Okay. Thank you. Who knew that was going to be the excitement of the... But the Akbar aliens, the Mon Cal, as it were, there's two that were made specifically to be Admiral Akbar, one to be more of an articulated puppet, one to be a worn mask, and then there were a bunch of others that were made to just be his Mon Cal men, which this is just like the best boy band ever. No, it's a trap. And now Kirk Thatcher will go back. Where is he? There he is. He's 19 here. He got to know Joe Johnston through through his parents or something like that, not through the industry. And Joe saw he was into making monsters and said, "Why don't you go interview with Phil and maybe you can work on the movie?" And his first movie is making creatures for Return of the Jedi, and he painted every one of the Mon Cal guys except the two that are Akbar, which Phil painted. This is much better, Frank. Thank you.
We got reuse, and the name is pretty easily gleaned from 3 eyes. And a lot of these creatures were made without any specific casting in mind. They wasn't thought to be like, this is going to be a creature in Jabba's palace. A lot of it was just a jamming, coming with creatures, not defining the role. And then George would walk through the assortment and decide, okay, that's the singer, that's a musician. And for a while, this guy was earmarked to potentially be a rebel leader. He was going to be like an Akbar type role, but we ended up instead making him a drunkard who picks fights in Jabba's palace. So.
Right, and he's got armadillo hands.
Yes, he does.
And that's Chris Walas's small maquette of him on the top left. A really, really close translation to the final there, and just a lot of character in that. At scale, the wrinkles and stuff are just great. Right. Yeah,
one of the most successful designs because he keeps showing up, and he showed up in the prequels, and now and most recently in Skeleton Crew, where we had one.
Oh yeah,
we had a 2-eyed one. He had an eye patch because he's a pirate. So
of course,
yeah.
Toothface, another Chris Walas design. The small maquette on the left, the final on the right, sculpted by Judy Elkins. Who Toothface, by the way, massive, giant noggin. And yeah, there you got. Similarly built is, do I have next? Yeah, Elam coming up. You see Bosk shows up in the background in Jabba's palace as well. This is on the barge.
So Elam is just mole spelled backwards. Sometimes it's just that easy.
Sometimes it is. Another Chris Walas design, Squid Head. Slimy and gross, the maquette, and I love it.
And so it was not until like the 80s, late 80s, early 90s, when West End Games that published the role-playing game, they started giving more proper names to these characters. And so we grew up with them knowing that the action figure was Squid Head, and then years later we find out that he's Tessic, he's Jabba's accountant, and he's of the Quarren species.
Naturally.
But I always still like the charm of the production names because they feel more like gangsters to me, like New Jersey gangsters saying, "Hey, go let Squid Head take care of it."
Right?
It's
like. Yeah, Yak Face, come on over here.
Exactly.
Yeah. We always said, the best Star Wars names end with either like man, face, head, or like guy. It's like, oh, there's the devil guy, there's Walrus Man, there's Squid Head, and it's just like face, head, man guy would be the best Star Wars name out of anything. Some more of our Quarren friend. There's Tony McVeigh. Speaking of 80s G.I. Joe action figures, he had like that perfect like G.I. Joe beard and hair thing going.
Realistic beard.
Yeah,
yes.
And that's Dave Carson sculpting behind him. Dave Carson also did, he worked on Dragon Slayer. He worked on a ton of stuff after that, including Star Tours, doing all the storyboards. And when you storyboard Star Tours, he told us you have to do 3 storyboards for every moment because you're doing the big screen, you're doing the action of the animatronics, and you're doing the small screen that's showing R2-D2.
So Ishi Tib, which is you have to be very careful with how you pronounce that. You have to leave the space and Ishi Tib. Don't run that together or else you get in trouble. He's also known as Starfish. I mean, that was his production name.
And that's Chris Walas maquette on that as well. This, Chris said, was his favorite. And if you think about the movie Gremlins, especially the first movie Gremlins, look at the eye stalks on Ishi Tib and go back and look at the first movie Gremlins, and you'll see like, oh, that is a Chris Walas design. Dave Carson sculpted the 9-num maquette, showed on the left, very purpley. And then the final mask, I don't know if, I feel like that was Dave as well. And there's Kirk Thatcher testing if 9-num would work as a puppet. Because he wasn't initially intended to be one, but when he was picked to be the co-pilot, they had to try and get some additional articulation out of him. So they just took the mask, jammed their hand inside, and tried to wiggle him around and see if that would work.
This is Wool Cabashite, also known as, what was it, Low
Overhead.
Low Overhead.
Yeah.
We think his name is like Low Overhead. Low got turned backwards into Wool. I don't know the path between Overhead and Cabashite, but my theory is Cabeza got somehow mangled into Cabashite. And it's just a working theory. But anyway, I've always, before I ever knew his name, in my mind, he's the thing that tries to lick C-3PO.
That's right. And that Nikto is not having it. Like, he's just like, no, keep that thing away from me. The cool thing is the maquette on the left there was actually sculpted by Joe Johnston, who famously designed a lot of the ships for Star Wars, Empire, storyboards, sketches, concept design, painted Boba Fett, directed The Rocketeer and Captain America: The First Avenger and Jurassic Park 3, and is just an insane talent all around. Hi, thanks, Nikto. Hey, Tony McVeigh again. So this is Tony working on the giant hand for the Rancor, which was, the Rancor being in the film was achieved through several scales, everything from full size to puppets. It was originally a maquette by Phil Tippett, which you see on the left side, both the top and the bottom. And then on the right is, I think that's Randy Dutra roughing the sculpt out, and then Phil went in and did all the finish work on it.
Phil famously describes the Rancor as a cross between a gorilla and a potato.
That's correct.
And that does it.
And he's right on, yeah. And they did initially try to do the Rancor as a man in a suit. And in some of those shots, Phil was in it. Some of the shots, it was Kirk Thatcher. And in the background, you can see they've got Han Carbonite just hanging out on the wall. And Tony McVeigh was in charge of making sure the suit got fabricated. He sculpted the head, fabricated all the muscles for the body. Pretty crazy thing. There's Kirk Thatcher wearing the legs on Phil Tippett's shoulders, and that's Kirk, I guess, reading his lines in the director chair.
And ILM pitched it as like it's going to be the most convincing Godzilla-type effect, a man in a suit. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And they shot it, and they tested it out, and George saw it looks like a man in a suit.
So they switched to a puppet.
Yeah.
And it was right after Dragon Slayer, so they still had the Dragon Slayer stop-motion puppet around, and so somebody goofing around took that photo, which I'm sure that turned up somewhere as a Great Dragon, right? Like,
no, yeah, it was in. I think it was published in Star Wars Chronicles in 1997, but without much context because it first came out in a Japanese book without translation. So I remember it surfacing, people going, "Is this a deleted scene?
Yeah,
was the Rancor supposed to fight a Great Dragon?"
Yeah. No. The Rancor also shows up in the background of the barge as this weird sculpted corbel that is 6 feet tall. We've actually 3D scanned that, and we do a wall piece. If anybody thinks like, oh, that's the most obscure thing I've ever seen, I need that on my wall, you can go to regalrobot.com and you can even buy one. And we do a magnet. But in addition to that, there is an Ishitib on the wall. And there's a Gamorrean hanging out on the wall. So, Jabba was into sculpture. He was into art. Speaking of Gamorreans, so these are all three by Dave Carson again. And you can see he kind of took it from a rough sketch on the left to a real troll-like beastly thing on the right, and then to the more toyetic kind of look in the middle. But the weight of that middle sculpt just kills me. It's a really, really good sculpt. And the troll-like aspect of that other one is great. And there's just three of your pig guards. I mean, yeah, it's tough to beat those.
Design. Yeah.
And this is some shots of them making the mold, roughing out one of the bodies, and some raw castings of the heads. And I apologize, I've actually lost his name, but that's getting the mechanics done. That's a Gamorrean picking his nose. You can blame, that's Stephen Costantino, I believe, that we can blame for that. He's the guy in the suit.
This is Bubo, Jabba's guard dog of sorts. He barks when the droids come in.
And that's, obviously a man going through a hole in the floor to act out that one. And I like how they think the Jawa is going to be enough to hold him back.
To hold back that
that's ambitious.
This is a whole thing. And we've got 16 minutes. I'm gonna try to go through this
we're
as
gonna-
quickly
we're
as
gonna go
possible.
quick. Okay, so
So the action figure that you had as a kid is a lie. It's a filthy, filthy lie.
terrible
You've been
lie.
lied to as children, and you trusted Kenner to not steer you wrong. But it turns out Max Rebo doesn't have legs. Like, this was not his design as envisioned in this maquette by Phil, right?
by Phil.
Was always that he was a two-limbed creature. He's playing the piano with his feet. In fact, that's what this artwork by Norman Reynolds, I think, is, that's designing the build for the red ball jet organ.
Yep.
Those aren't arms. That's clearly splayed legs
Yep.
that Max Rebo is playing there.
Phil even says it in one of the old documentaries. He says the two-legged
two-legged,
character
yeah.
doing plays the organ.
And this is my sketch. After I was like, I'm a madman trying to convince the world that what they know is wrong. And they're like, well, how does that work? It's like, no, this is what he's supposed to look like. This
right.
is the intended design. And you find all this evidence. Like, look at the sketch of what the puppeteer is supposed to do when they're inside the Max Rebo outfit.
And also note the red outline is clearly Phil Tippett.
Yeah, that's true.
Somebody sketched him on a wall.
But the intent was you're supposed to basically steeple your arms so that your elbows are on the top. And the problem
Which doesn't
is,
work great.
No one can do that.
Yeah.
And no one can do that while wearing rubber and having to be on a hot set and play this all. So naturally the arms, the legs, the limbs splay sideways and they start to look more like arms, and it looks like Max has shoulders.
That's right. And this is one of the restoration jobs that we did at my company, is actually restoring the original costume. And I did try to add a little of this to it when we made the custom form to support it, but that was one of the coolest things we've ever had in our studio, is the original Max Rebo. And we've also duplicated as part of our archive collection, scanned off the real things. However, if you thought the legs were the last of it, you're horribly wrong. There's more. When we were making our replica, one of the people doing the paint for me, one of the women who's one of our painters, was asking me something. Like, oh, is he supposed to have this many spots on his flippers? I'm like, his what? His flippers. I'm like, those are his ears, you silly person. Are you kidding me? Like, I know how many legs he has. You can't tell me those are flippers. So I said, you know what? I know Phil Tippett. I'm going to ask Phil. I said, Phil, what do you call these? And I just sent him a picture pointing to it. I didn't want to lead the witness. Yeah, somebody gasped. That's the correct response.
I feel so incredibly vindicated because I was like the last person in the world who knew what Max Rebo is supposed to be anatomically.
Yeah.
Trying to shout from my mountaintop.
So please go out on social after this.
Join
Pick up those phones.
Join the church of
That's
Max
right.
Rebo and let the
tell
world
people
know.
he has only 2 limbs, and those are flippers, not his ears. Poor Six Eye, he got nixed per some of the faxes that were going back and forth between England. So this guy was built but never showed up in the movie. Hermiodal, absolutely one of my favorites.
He had the best. His name evolved from the original version, which is pretty amazing, but would probably not make a toy, Mr. Hemi Moroid. So, but Hermiodal, hear me yodel. You know, these guys are having fun.
But what I love is just how disgusting he is.
Yeah.
And it's just...
His eyes are filled with pus, it looks like. It's amazing.
They're yellowed out, yeah. And I just love how much slime they put on. Is that his tongue? Like, what is that? There's Tony McVeigh sculpting on Cy Snoodles. And Phil Tippett's original design. Look how tiny her arms are. And that's them starting to figure out how they could turn her into a functional puppet that could be the lead singer in the band. Oh, and if you look closely, there's that tauntaun in the background. There's cutscene. I don't know.
little, a big fan. Big
That
fan of
prop
Cy
cup
Snoodles.
actually turned up recently.
Oh, really?
It's like somebody with a thing of puff paint on a plastic
Amazing.
cup. Ken Ralston, multi-Oscar award-winning special effects artist, brilliant artist, great cartoonist. He did Weequay for the movie based on, in his mind, Queequeg from Moby Dick. Yeah. And that was his design intent. And the final is a little more refined. He doesn't have the ears and stuff, but really, faithful to his. I love the stoic nature of this character. A great production Polaroid on the left. It doesn't quite have the same oomph without the mask, though. So Phil's early Bib Fortuna, he said that he was channeling the Elephant Man for this. And they wound up, okay, so Phil was talking to me about this. and he said that he was more impressed with the final makeup than his design, which a lot of times these guys won't say. They, they like their work. And he said that the red eyes, he's like the contacts and the sharp teeth, like the guy would look at you on set and give you the shivers. And it's like to hear Phil Tippett say that something gave him the shivers, you're just like, ugh. And there you go.
So the original Phil Tippett maquette inspired a very gangly looking Twi'lek that's part of
No, I don't.
That's part of Saw Gerrera's group in Rogue One.
Yeah.
And I got to name him, and I named him Beezer because that was Bib Fortuna's original name in the early draft of Return of the Jedi. So trying to keep it all in the same family kind of thing.
There's Judy Elkins, who sculpted a bunch of stuff for the film. She somehow got all the big ones. Like she did, what was that, Toothface before? Here she's doing Yak Face. Look at how big Yak Face's head is next to her body. Yeah. Like this is a giant sculpture. And she made that out of like 150 pounds of clay. And then somebody made an even heavier mold. And look, there's the fight you were talking about.
Yeah,
and
basically.
One of those cups.
Yak Face and Reese have a fight over, I believe the novel is like, it's like over quantum mechanics or something. But
that's what everybody wants.
But the gag is that that Salacious is the one that is egging it on. So that's why he's.
And they accidentally knock 3PO out in the process. So you see 3PO on the floor in front of that beautiful Rancor Corbel, if I must say. And then this is in the movie. Yeah. And I never spotted it when they first open the curtain and reveal that Jabba was watching all along when Leia unfreezes Han. He's got his hand over 3PO's mouth so that he can't warn Han, I guess. Which is amazing that droids are programmed that way, because that happens to him in Empire too, right?
Yeah. Well, just put your hand there and
it's like a light sensor on the mouth.
It's like a table saw thing. Like if you get too close, it just stops.
Yeah. Like
right?
they do the demo with a hot dog.
Yeah.
I love the Droopy McCool maquette. That was sculpted by the late Wesley Seeds, and Jeannie Lauren and the late Dan Howard fabricated the suit. There's some great footage of, they took a little person and they molded his body, and then they added foam on top of that and layers of stuff to create that creature. This one's funny because everyone sees the maquette. This was done by Tom Sanamon, who did all the armatures for the AT-ATs and for the Tauntauns. He's a stop-motion armature genius, the AT-STs as well. Everybody's like, oh, that's E.T. That's totally E.T. And, E.T. was in development, but nowhere near him. He never saw it. It's just a weird coincidental kind of thing. There's the final with the eye patch. He could be in Skeleton Crew.
There's Amana Man, sometimes lovingly just referred to as Banana Man.
Why?
And or simply the Headhunter too. Just Just a great giant design lurking in the background.
He's got those are heads hanging off of his staff, and the little maquette version of it, the heads are like devilish and they're alien looking. And then the in his hand is a corpse, a human like just rotting corpse. And I love that he has eye holes that we never noticed this whole time.
Yeah, that's where the
they
performer
just
is.
Flip them down or flip them up if she needed a little bit of air under there.
Elephant Mon, which based on Elephant Man was the name.
Yeah.
A fantastic maquette.
Yeah.
And another one of these gigantic builds.
Yeah. And Tony McVeigh sculpted this, he said, in about 2 days, which is bonkers for anybody that does big clay sculpting. The rig in the middle shows you just like how heavy and large this costume was. Love this stuff where they're mocking out his legs, and originally Salacious Crumb was intended to be his sidekick.
Yeah, and so that scene that did get cut of Yak Face picking a fight with Reese or vice versa or whatever, was originally going to be Effant Mon in the fight. Right. And in fact, if you read the Return of the Jedi novel, it doesn't say Yak Face, it says Effant Mon's there. And if you watch the behind-the-scenes footage, there's a shot of someone punching Effant Mon.
Oh, yeah.
And just to see how it would react, and that's why he was designed for that scene.
Salacious Crumb was made by Tony McVeigh just from scratch. He didn't have a maquette. He just fabricated it, and I think he sculpted the head, but the body's all fabricated. And there's another young Kirk Thatcher on the right, and it's Tim Rose on the left, who did the puppeteering in the movie. Kirk Thatcher puppeteered him for the classic Creatures Return of the Jedi making of. This was a creature called Lightman. We're going to hustle because we're running a little late. that the famous stunt person Peter Diamond said was the most dangerous stunt he ever did because of the voltage going through those lights. This is not LEDs. These are giant 1983 bulbs.
And so Lightman is not his finished look. He was shot like this on VistaVision film, which is the type of film you use when you're shooting visual effects. He was shot intended to be a visual effect. He just creates interactive lighting, and then they were going to comp over some sort of creature effect to make him very exotic, a creature made of light.
And on the right, you can see Yam Nose from the cantina with his head on his thing, and that's Effantman with the whole front section off. And this, Dave Carson said, was one of the ideas for what Lightman was going to look like. George said, sculpt me something like the Close Encounters alien, and Dave Carson sculpted that little guy. The Sarlacc is a creature too. Giant, made full scale. All of those teeth were rubber, so they wouldn't hurt the stuntmen, who, by the way, did get hurt as well. The first guy in the hole broke his leg. And that's, sometimes you need to take a break and have a tab.
Yep. And it would fill up with scorpions overnight. That was a problem.
Yeah, somebody had to go in and scare the scorpions and the snakes out of it every morning.
These are the cane heads, which became the in-universe name of Cane Adis. And this two-headed giraffe-striped reptile that's lurking in the background.
And according to Tom Santamine, who sculpted this, this was actually intended to be two creatures that were intertwined and not a single two-headed creature. And he actually, it does show up in the movie, but he sculpted it twice because the first time he sculpted the maquette, he left it in the oven too long, it just completely burnt. And there's a picture of him with this black charred cane head thing as he's sculpting it again next to it, just, hating life.
There's a little puppet named Rockwart,
which was sculpted full size by Judy Elkins and is giant because Judy. Barada.
Yeah, Barada. We're running into our Day the Earth Stood Still alien. So Barada is named after, here's Nikto, and then Klaatu is in here
Klaatu
somewhere.
will be coming up.
There's another guy, Pote Snitkin. These were all creatures that were meant to be in the sail barge skiff battle.
AKA Snit Plotkin, depending on if
Yeah.
you talk to the crew guys. Hoover's
great.
Hoover was made but doesn't show up in the movie. But your favorite thing.
Yeah, I have a photo, but I didn't bring it, unfortunately. But a few years ago, I found Hoover in the archives, and he has a blonde wig on, and I don't know why. No one knows why he's blonde now, but he is.
Maybe he was going to be reused for the Ewok movies. There's Dave Carson sculpting the full size based on an awesome maquette by Ken Ralston again. And in the background, you can see low overhead, the shape, that sort of snail-like shape on the left.
Great photo.
I love this because he doesn't have his eyeballs in yet. And it's not the final paint. He's got like gold highlights.
So Klaatu was actually the name of one particular of these aliens. The generic name for all of them were Woof.
That's right. Because you look at it and you go, woof.
Yeah.
And apparently Woof was going to be the one who cried when the Rancor died, and they switched it to the human Rancor keeper instead.
Toadstool Terror.
The
hand
Toadstool
puppet.
Terror. Also, when they made the life-size one, they called it the Wonton Terror as the creature crew. And that's a sketch by, I think it's Joe Johnston that did the top one.
Yeah.
And there he is hiding in the background behind the band. And is that just like a fan that Rebo has?
I don't know what Rebo's holding. Yeah.
He's got fans.
Here's
Love
the Yuzum. Yuzum, I'll keep it short, but Yuzums were originally intended to be creatures that lived on Endor alongside the Ewoks, but the budget cut it short, so they concentrated on Ewoks instead, and they took the one Yuzum that they did build and put it in Jabba's palace.
And we have, to the left is a sketch by Nilo Rhoda Shimero, and to the top middle rather, is the maquette made by Judy Elkins. We actually have a replica of this coming out in 2 weeks, and I'm very excited because I love Yuzum. He looks like he should be in Wallace and Gromit, and he was made years before Wallace and Gromit, so I think Nilo and Judy should get royalty. Judy also sculpted this bent back dancer on the top left, Ken Ralston on the right, and Phil at the bottom. Various takes. I love the Ziggy Stardust makeup on Phil's take. Obviously, the final look was pretty unique to that, but they kept the head tails. And I love Reese's pose here.
Yes.
Like, he is getting into whatever's happening. He is here for it. As is Yarna on the right, the other dancer. And you know what? Behind her also, this sort of Lady Gaga looking girl. Does she have a?
She does now. I'm
Is it
blanking on it.
Jess?
Jess, yeah.
Yeah. So that brings us back to where we started. We have Woofs, we have Niktos, we have Yuzums and the Toadstool Terror, but we still have Weeba Weeba. Does anyone know who Weeba Weeba is yet? So I'm going to make this mystery one step deeper. We went to the archives and they said, do you know what this is? It was found on the porch. And it said specifically not Star Wars, which is great too.
Right.
And so we looked at it. You didn't know.
I didn't know.
I didn't know. I said it looks like a casting of F. Aunt
Aunt
Mon's
Mon's.
full-size tongue.
And we're like, but why would a tongue have braided hair
Yeah.
on it? You know?
Was it reused for an Ewok movie? They did a lot of that.
Yeah.
So we go back and forth. This is now maybe 2 months ago. I'm going through Return of the Jedi looking for screen grabs to go with our Yuzum release, and I come across that shot. And it's the back of Lady Gargan's head.
Yeah.
And we also found this picture of a sketch of her costume saying Weeba Weeba. So that's who Weeba Weeba
that's
is.
who she is.
The
So
end
she's
of all
known
of it.
by multiple names. We know her as Yarnadel Gargan now, or Gargan. In the credits, she's just listed rather impolitely as Fat Dancer.
Come on now.
But now, in my heart, she's Weeba Weeba.
Always Weeba Weeba. And with that, we say thank you very much. We made it with 16 seconds to spare. Thank you, everybody, for stopping in. Feel free to follow us on socials and things like that. He's got one of the funniest social feeds you'll ever find, and it's definitely worth it.
And if this kind of obsession, if you want to see more of it, come to our Cantina panels, please.
Yeah, they are as in-depth, if not more, because we stretched it over 2 hours.
Yeah.
So there's one tomorrow, there's one on Sunday, and it's going to be a good time. Hope to see some of you there. Thanks very much. Have a good night.
Bye.
All right. Yeah. Okay.